Hello. We are making sure that we are live over here in Facebook land. And it looks like we are live. So here we go. It's good to see everybody. It's Thursday, July 2nd already. And as you're probably noticing, it's just me tonight. Okay, we're live. I just needed to see it. So, welcome tonight. We wanted to just do a special little live here to talk about what's happening on the Hebrew calendar because it's kind of a big deal. And so I wanted to just come on and talk a little bit about this. I'm going to be able to see any comments by looking at my phone. So there we go. Okay. All set. So welcome. So today we are in the month of Tammuz, and this is like every other month, right? There's so much that happens, but something very, very important happened on this particular day. So welcome to Tammuz. And we always say, there are moments on God's calendar that invite us to celebrate, and there are some that invite us to pause. This is a pause. This is definitely a pause moment. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the date today, which is the 17th of Tammuz. And this begins a very important 3-week time on God's calendar. So from the 17th of Tammuz to the 9th of Av, we enter into what has traditionally been called the 3 weeks. There's a Hebrew name for it, but we're just going to call it the 3 weeks. And historically, this has been observed as a season of mourning. So this is the most painful moment these next 3 weeks in Israel's history. So this is known as what happened in this time, the breaching of the walls in Jerusalem, the destruction of both of the temples, the ultimate consequence of a people who turned from God's heart just continuously over and over. And today it's very special because today is actually the day that Moses came down and gave the tablets, right? The 10 Commandments. So one thing we wanted to talk about is that this season, what if it's more about remembering, I should say less about remembering Israel's failures and more of an invitation to recognize that we also share in this crossroads, because this is a crossroads for sure in their history. And I don't believe that God asks us to revisit history, right? We want to take time to really capitalize on these days on the calendar, to acknowledge them, to align with them, right? And so it isn't really just to go back and revisit this. It's an invitation to revisit so we can choose a different future. So on this day, according to Jewish tradition, is the day that Moses came down from Mount Sinai carrying the tablets of the covenant. And what he found wasn't just the people worshiping the golden calf. He literally found a people who forgot who they were. And to be fair, they were just barely starting to realize who they were, right? They had come out of bondage and they're just starting to understand their identity. And that's why these next 3 weeks are so important, because it's our invitation to ask, where have I forgotten who I am? Because when we forget our identity, we inevitably return to survival mode. This has been something that I talk about all the time. If you've worked with me with grief recovery, we know that a lot of the times the things that we do to survive are things that we have to recognize today, right? And when we think about these 3 weeks, it's easy to focus on the outward events that were happening. So much happened. There was a golden calf. The spies get sent in like a week. The spies are about to go in. The Israelites were in the wilderness. All of these things that were happened. And we want to realize that none of these things happened overnight. Every outward collapse began with something that was happening in the heart. So long before the temple fell, the trust had begun to erode. Long before they refused to enter the promised land, which was going to happen in 3 weeks, fear had become louder than their faith. So external events reveal what already is happening internally. And can't you just relate to that? I can. I totally can. And our lives rarely change because of one dramatic decision. More often, they're shaped by small stories that we rehearse every day. The things that we think about, that we ruminate on. These are places where fear becomes our guide. And it's so easy to kick into that because our nervous system is literally attached to that. Something comes up and we respond. We find ourselves responding. We find that disappointment shapes our expectations. Isn't that so easy to do? That we don't want to get too excited. We don't want to, think too positively about that because what if ... But what if it could actually work out? And so we want to recognize that one of the greatest tragedies of Israel's story is that they had been delivered from Egypt, but Egypt had not yet been delivered from them. They were free physically, but they still thought like slaves. They still didn't know what to do on their own, right? And Moses was delayed in coming down the mountain. I've read a lot of different things from 6 hours to a day, but he was delayed and they became impatient. They were gripped by fear. And when fear comes in, it always looks for something it can control. Oh, how does that land? That is so true. That is so true. So what did they do? They built a golden calf. They built something that they could see and feel and do what they used to do too, right? So many times we hear this story taught as rebellion, right? They were rebelling. But as the more that I've learned about human nature and about these things, I feel like this is just a survival response, right? When uncertainty came, then you reach for what's familiar, for something that you can see, touch, feel, make you feel safe because it's something that you've done before. And so when life becomes uncertain, we reach for our own golden calves. And it's not because we don't love God, but it's because those old patterns still whisper to us very loudly, those patterns that we do, the habits that we do. We overwork, we people please, we numb out, we control, we perform. And it's not because we're bad or evil. It's because somehow, sometime along the way, those strategies helped us survive. And so here's what I want to leave you with today. I want you to hear today. The Father is never interested in exposing our hearts to condemn us. He reveals what he intends to restore. And I think that's something that's worth writing down. It's worth thinking about. It's worth meditating on. He's not interested in condemning us ever, ever. And when things get revealed, it's what he intends to restore. What a beautiful thing. And what a beautiful way to change your viewpoint on things. So not long after God tells Moses to send, not long after this time, in about a week's time actually, God is going to tell Moses to send in the 12 spies. And this story is so intense, you guys. He asked them to go in and see the land. He didn't ask them to go in and see if the land was worth taking. He didn't ask them to go and see if they could take it. He just said, go see it. So they weren't there to evaluate it. They were just there to look at it. And they all saw the same lands. They saw giants, they saw cities, they saw fruit. They all even saw the same promise, but they returned with two very completely different reports. Their perspectives were different. Joshua and Caleb looked at the giants through God's lens of faithfulness. They didn't even flinch. And the others looked through that lens of fear. They looked through that lens of seeing just giants, and there's no way we can take this. So that is the crossroads, and that's where we begin these 3 weeks. Not with this destruction, but with a question. What are you seeing right now? Where are you at in your life, in this season, in this year, in this time? And what lens are you looking through? Because our vision is what shapes our direction, and our direction eventually shapes our destiny. So maybe the greatest obstacle in our lives isn't the giant standing in front of us. Maybe it's the story we're believing about the giant. What is your story? And just think about the first thing that comes into your mind. Because here's what's so awesome about this time on the calendar. 40 years later, Joshua stands at the edge of the promised land. Same time, same opportunity, all these things. And he even promised that when you go into the land, there's going to be battles. Actually, the minute they stepped into the land, the manna stopped. So they were on their own, but they were prepared. It's unknown. But what changed? Joshua changed, and Caleb. Joshua and Caleb did. And what's so incredible about his time, their time in the wilderness, is that it did not make them cynical. It made them convinced. For 40 years, they watched God provide. He provided manna. He provided everything they needed. They watched his faithfulness. And they learned that delay does not mean abandonment. Just let that one land. Delay does not mean abandonment. And these two men, they weren't extraordinary because they were fearless. God is the one who's extraordinary. And what he taught them in those 40 years was that God never failed them. And that's what enabled them to cross the threshold. Their confidence actually grew. It didn't shrink in the wilderness. Wilderness times have a way of doing that, don't they? The wilderness times are when we feel the most connected to God. And it's where trust can take a deeper root if we let it, if we see it that way. And I wonder sometimes that this is what God is doing in us all along, all the time. Not just these 3 weeks, right, of the year, every day of the year. But I love to think about God's timings and the things on the calendar that we get to align with. And aligning with that, my daughter asked me this today. She was like, what do you mean by aligning with that? I was like, what a great question when you think about it. When we take the time to appreciate and actually think about what happened on this date and why is it so important that we remember that? Because a lot of times we can so relate, and that's where this becomes our own story. And it's so important to understand that Jesus changed everything. Because without him, the 3 weeks do end in mourning. But because of him, they are our invitation. Because like everything, Jesus fulfilled it all. He entered the wilderness, he faced temptation, he overcame fear. He fulfilled what Israel could not. And because of him, we no longer have to strive to be accepted. We get to live knowing that we're not just accepted, but we are beloved. We don't have to build golden calves to feel secure, and we no longer have to let fear write a report over our lives. Such a powerful thing to think about as we enter into these 3 weeks. So just to talk for a minute about survival, and because I believe this is where so many of us live. If it's not all the time, it's a percentage of the time. And I'm speaking for myself. It's so easy to fall back into survival mode, into survival patterns, the ways that we go through life. But to remind you that we've been delivered. And if you are living from survival, I want to really invite you into these 3 weeks. Not to remember Israel's failure, but to ask, Where am I living like someone who hasn't been set free? And here's a question. What if the parts of yourself you've spent years fighting aren't really your enemies? What if they're the places where God wants to bring his deepest healings? To those survival patterns. They're evidence that somewhere in your story you survived. And now the message for you today is you don't have to live there anymore. And to remind us that the promised land was not withheld because God wasn't faithful. It was delayed because his people still interpreted promise through a lens of survival. How are you interpreting God's promise through a lens of survival? God has been revealing so much to me about my own self-reliance and how that has affected so many areas of my life. And I can honestly say that I feel like in this season, this spring season of 2026, 5786 on the Hebrew calendar, God is tearing down those places on a much deeper level. And what's coming on the other side is this peace, this incredible peace. We are entering into July, we're halfway through the year. We're more than halfway through. Crazy to think about. What was your word for the year? I think that it's important to revisit that. And is there a connection to that word and what God is doing right now? What is this season doing right now? What is it exposing for you? My word this year is dominion. And I'm serious, I could do a whole thing on just that. And what God has been showing me just in the last couple days, when you put something out there that you're desiring, which is to step in, take dominion over what God's calling me to do, it's amazing to think about what has to happen in order for that to happen, right? The things that have to be peeled off and taken down. What's your word? How is that connecting? It's very, very important. So imagine if these next 3 weeks became not seasons of heaviness or shame, but of honest reflection. Think of this as a season of realignment, where old survival patterns begin to lose their authority and where fear no longer gets the final word. It is through that our vision becomes clearer and we get to see it through the lens of faithfulness, of God's faithfulness, right? Instead of our own circumstance. So maybe you're at a crossroads. And the question is, are you going to still continue to live in survival or begin living from sonship? Will you keep rehearsing a report of fear or remember the promises of God? So over these next 21 days, I want to invite you into a simple practice. Every morning before you reach for your phone, before the demands of the day begin, take a few moments and pray, God, help me see what you see and help me to see you more clearly. Help me see yourself through your eyes and recognize where fear has been shaping my vision. Journal what you hear. Pay attention to what is surfacing. And we actually have something very special for you. If you are on our email list, I emailed this out yesterday with the link to today's live, but I'm going to also I will put it in the Facebook group as a file that you can download. But this is something because God's really been stirring in our hearts to do more than just learn about the Hebrew months. And if you've been with us at all, you know that we try to give you guys whatever we can as a resource to help us live them out. And so what we've done is we've created something brand new called Living an Inspired Month. So think of this as a companion for your journey and a place that you can write down on it. It's to slow down, to reflect and to listen and to intentionally walk. So spend some time with it, and it's going to ask some questions. You can fill those out. It asks questions like this: what survival patterns am I ready to leave behind? Write it down. How will I intentionally care for my heart, my mind, and my body? What truths will I stand on? And who is God inviting me to become this month? There's a space on it down at the bottom. I don't think I have it printed out. There's a space where you can write. Think of it as kind of a manifesto for the month. What are you? I am going to respond ... Whatever comes up for you, write it down. There's so much power in writing it down. And in the morning, before you get on your phone or before the day goes, read it. Just read it out loud. There's an incredible thing that happens when we speak these things. Our mouths, our tongues have the power of life and death, right? We can rewire beliefs that we have just by speaking. And when you speak something over and over and over every day, that's exactly what you're doing. So my prayer is by the end of Tammuz, you won't have just completed this page. You'll be able to look back and see what God is doing in your heart, what he has already started. So I'm going to put a link to download this down below in the comments as soon as we go off. And we hope that this will become a companion for you. And we've created some things beginning of next month, the month of Av, that we're going to be sending out. And we'll be sending it out every month so that you have something that you can print out if you want. You could just look at it on your pad if you want. But this one you want to print out because you want to write on it. Because we're not just about learning something new. We're about becoming someone new. And so when we arrive at the 9th of Av in 3 weeks, we're not going to focus on a generation that stepped back. We will celebrate the God who is teaching us to step forward. And that is a really, really powerful place to come from. So thank you so much for being here with me. And for tonight, I just wanted to do a quick little overview of the season that we are in. I hope that you have a beautiful and blessed night. Enjoy the rest of the month of Tammuz. And we will be back in a couple weeks to begin the month of Av with y'all. Enjoy. Bye.